dream room. Lately I have been having strange dreams. I don't mean weird, I mean I dream about my grandparents' house that I used to live in. Have you ever had this kind of experience? A friend from elementary school that you had completely forgotten about appears in your dream, and you suddenly remember him vividly. I have this kind of experience, especially during summer vacation when I am living a monotonous life and old memories keep appearing in my dreams. As soon as I graduate from junior high school and enter spring vacation, classmates from elementary school appear in my dreams, and I remember their names and faces that I had forgotten. I graduated from university this year and am now living at home with my parents and studying for the civil service exam, but I often have dreams about the past because I have been sleeping and waking up to study. Among them, many of them were set in my grandparents' house where I lived until I was in the second grade of elementary school. The house had a large entrance and a doorway. I used the stairs outside the house to go up to the second floor. Wasps built nests in the eaves of the extraordinarily large veranda, and part of the first floor was leased to a liquor store. The dream itself was ridiculous, but it was nostalgic, and I was strangely happy to remember it after I woke up. The house has since been torn down after the death of my grandmother, who was the last one left. So one day I dreamed of my grandfather's wake. There were many people gathered in a small room on the first floor. For some reason, I was afraid of the running lights that I saw for the first time spinning round and round, and that was when I realized for the first time that my grandfather had died. When I woke up, I wanted to tell my brother about this dream, so I told him about it at dinner. My brother thought about it for a moment, but then he quickly answered, "My grandfather's house had this kind of layout, didn't it?" My brother thought about it for a moment, but then quickly responded, "Yes, yes. The room on the first floor where Grandpa's wake was held was like this," I said to him, and he made a face like, "What?" I said, "I can't remember." I felt like I had a fish bone stuck in my throat. I was eager to confirm that the layout was really correct. My brother is 2 years younger than me, so I thought it was no wonder he couldn't remember, so I talked to my mother again. Then my mother clapped her hands and said, "Yes, yes. You remember so well." About a week later, I dreamt about the house again. I remembered playing Ken Ken Pa on the jolly road in front of the house, and that there was a butcher shop 2 doors down, where I used to buy chicken and eat it. I also remembered the detailed layout of the second floor of the house because I ran around in the dream, so I told my mother again. She was listening with nostalgia, but then she looked doubtful. She asked, "Was there a room at the end of the hallway?" I explained that there was a room behind the kitchen in the living room, but she didn't recall it. After my mother married my father, she came to live with him in his parents' house, but she only lived there for the same period of time as I did, because she rented a separate room during her honeymoon period. However, I was not convinced that a grown-up adult could forget what I, a child, remembered, so I persistently asked her about it, but she could not recall it. Perhaps because I was curious about it, I had another dream about the room about 3 days later. It was a bit of a nightmare. I was being chased by a killer or something, and when I ran into the room, I was surprised to find it covered in dust. I was almost cornered, but after barricading myself in with the couch, I opened the window and jumped out to escape. That was the dream. I woke up and suddenly remembered something. A window. Yes, there was only one window on the second floor looking up from the jolly road at the front of the house. On the left side of the second floor. However, that window was completely killed by a storm shutter or something, or anyway, a wooden board. So, the second floor always looked very plain and bleak. That window was probably a room at the end of the corridor. I was curious about that room, so I ventured to talk to my father, with whom I usually did not have conversations. My father looked surprised. "It can't be," he said. "No, there certainly was." I also remembered that I was often locked in the storage room in the middle of the corridor, the room next to the room in question. I was chastised after I had done something naughty. It was very scary because there was no window in that storage room. There was a Buddhist altar there, and my grandmother used to recite the Buddhist chant. Namu Myoho Renge Cho. Namu Myoho Renge Cho. I did not know it at the time, but my grandmother was the second wife of the family, that is, she joined the family after the death of my grandfather's first wife. Because of the difference in religious affiliation between her family and the main family, my grandmother was only allowed to keep her own Buddhist altar in such a storage space. Incidentally, when my grandmother died, the Sagakai asked if they could hold the funeral at our house, but I politely declined. Anyway, in my mind, the storage room was a room where I could hear sutra chanting, and it was a room of horror with no windows. Thus, that window I saw from the outside was supposed to be the window of the room in question, that is, the room at the end of the corridor. I had a memory of having entered that room, and I also remembered some parts of the inside. When I told him this, however, he stiffened and fell silent. He then left the room, saying he was going to call his uncle, in other words, his father's brother. When he came back, he began to talk in a mysterious tone of voice. That room was the room of his ex-wife who died 30 years ago. That his ex-wife's last child was his father. I knew this, however. I knew that he was not related to the person I called my grandmother. And to my surprise, the room where my ex-wife, who was often ill, had died quietly had been completely sealed up because it was an abomination. Then I remembered that at the end of the hallway there was a room that was no longer used. I remembered that the corridor was filled with unused chests, cupboards, and scrap wood. My mother did not know that there was a room at the end of the hallway. I do remember a dark dead end in the corridor without a light bulb. But I also remember that there was a door at the end of the corridor, which was dark even in the daytime, but was empty of such bulky objects, and that I opened it. I was confused. My father said, "As far as I know, that room has not been used for decades. Long before you were born." I asked my brother about it, and he was sure. "I am sure of it. The door was slammed and you couldn't get in. So if you remember that room, it can't be. That can't be true." But my father also said, "My mother was always on the sofa in that room. She told us to sleep on the bed because it was too uncomfortable for her, but when my brothers and I came to her room, she was always smiling and laughing on that couch." I remembered that sofa. I was going to tell the story to my friend, but I felt like I was in the middle of a conversation, so I wasn't sure what to do. What is my memory of that room? In the end, I didn't know. Then yesterday, when I happened to be in town to meet a friend, I passed by that grandparents' house. I had never been there since it was demolished almost 10 years ago. I was strangely curious about it, so I rode my bicycle there. The scenery around the house had completely changed. The road in front of my house had been widened and many stores had opened. When I arrived at the place where the house used to be, I felt my hair stand on end. A large pachinko parlor stood on the site. I felt a sudden tightness in my chest when I saw it. I remembered everything. My grandmother was looking forward to her first grandchild. My uncle did not marry for a reason, and he wished more than anyone that my father's child would be born soon. He knew very well about his own illness. However, since my father married late, my grandmother eventually passed away without seeing me, her first grandchild. I remember my grandfather telling me about this as a child. I remember my grandfather telling me how sorry he must have been. And then I remembered. And I understood that my grandmother longed to be held by me in that room. That thought probably remained in that room. And she invited me. She invited me. I remembered. I used to sleepwalk in the middle of the night and say, "Where's Grandma?" That I used to say. That every time I did, my grandmother-in-law would fuss over me and say, "Yes, Yes, I'm here. I have never been in that room. When I was a child, I had a dream that I entered that room. My grandmother had invited me into that room in my dream. I shivered as I looked at the noisy cityscape in front of me. Maybe she is still there. The house may be gone and the family may be gone, but she will probably never leave that room. That must be the reason for my dreams these days. Pachinko parlor. Pachinko parlor. Damn pachinko parlor. I was so angry at myself for being so helpless. At least I'll visit the grave soon. This concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.